Hello, friends! In this lesson, we use the model from the previous one, which you'll find under the Resources tab. In this video, we learn for the first time how to simulate workers by expanding the model so that workers perform tasks at each machine. One worker will be assigned to the dismantle station, another to the drilling machine, and a third to the assembly station. We'll also take a look at how to create factory walls, and toward the end of the lesson, we'll cover how to generate worker statistics. Let's go ahead and get started. We can start by creating the factory walls. You can find it in the Edit tab. We create factory walls with dimensions of 30 by 15 meters. We begin adding objects related to worker simulation. These are located in the Resources tab, where we select the worker pool object. The worker pool object is unique in that it generates workers at the start of the simulation based on its internal configuration table. We also insert a broker object, which handles task distribution among the stations. Each worker pool requires one associated broker. In most cases, there's no need to configure the broker, and we won't be setting it up in this lesson, as it typically operates automatically. To configure the worker pool, we first create our own custom worker class. We do this by going to the class library, opening the Resources tab, locating the worker object, and creating a duplicate. We now have our worker object and need to assign it to the worker pool. This can't be done using drag and drop, so we open the worker pool to configure it manually. When we open the worker pool, we can see that some of the settings reference the broker. That's the same broker object we've already inserted into our model. In the worker pool, the default travel mode is set to move freely within area. This means that workers move freely around the frame, so we don't have to create pathways for them. In order to edit the workers in this table, we check the box that allows us to modify the default settings. This means we disable inheritance from its class and set custom properties. So, by clicking, we open the internal creation table, and here we enter our worker. But we have 3 workers, meaning one for each process, so we set the amount to 3. We go over the other settings in the following lessons. At this point, we have the setup configured with 3 workers. In front of each station, the dismantle station, the drilling machine, and the assembly station, we place worker place objects. These indicate where the worker will perform the operation associated with each station. So, we insert those 3 worker places in front of each station. We see that the worker places are now red, which means they aren't paired with any station. We link them by dragging the station onto the workplace. When the workplace turns gray, it confirms the connection has been successfully established. We verify this by opening this workplace and checking, and we see that it's paired with the cutting machine, which is actually our dismantled station, so that's correct. We do the same for the drilling machine and the assembly station. We can also notice a small graphical detail. The workplaces are now rotated to the right. It's not a technical problem, but the thing is, the workers won't be facing the machines, so we rotate these workplaces. To do that, we right-click on the given workplace, go to Edit 3D Properties, then go to the first tab, Transformation, and just change the angle to 270 degrees. And we do the same for the other 2 remaining workplaces. At this point, we still need to set each of these stations so that importer processing is activated. This means that the stations call a worker when they need one. As a result, whenever a process is triggered, a worker must be present to perform it. The station operates only when the assigned worker reaches the corresponding workplace. So we set this up first for the dismantling station. We go to the Importer tab and enable the first importer processing. Consequently, that our workers are only involved in this case for the type of process called processing. As we see, workers can perform other services as setup, failure, or transport. Therefore, we enable it for the drilling machine as well. We enable importer processing and assign it to the assembly station. As we can see, the assembly station also requires a broker to operate. At this stage, we run the simulation to check whether everything is configured correctly. I can see there's an issue here. The first issue is that the worker can't reach the workplace. The same problem applies to the other workplace as well. When we press the O key, the simulation highlights obstacles, represented as an area around each object within 1 meter. Since our workplace falls within this restricted area, we need to move it outside of that zone. We move the object, activate the obstacle view again, and see that it's still within the restricted area. So, we adjust its position further to ensure it's completely outside the obstacle zone. We now run the simulation again to see if the issue is resolved. We check everything is functioning correctly. At this point, the system recognizes changes and the dismantle station successfully calls a worker, and the worker takes part in the process. The same applies to the drilling machine, and we can already see that the worker has arrived at the assembly station and is actively participating in the process. Finally, we'll demonstrate how to display worker utilization. For version 2302 and earlier, it's necessary to use the worker chart object. The worker chart object is found in the Manage class library. We find it in the second tab called Libraries. And we select Worker Chart. And this object appears in the Tools tab. And we simply pair it with the whirlpool by just grabbing the whirlpool and dropping it onto the Worker Chart object. But the simulation must be reset. We repeat this step, stop the simulation, drag the worker pool onto the worker chart, and select Individuals. This allows us to view the individual utilization for each worker. This setup applies to version 2302 and earlier. However, if you're using version 2404 or later, you only need to insert the chart object and pair it directly with the worker pool. No additional configuration is required. At this point, I go back and delete the object, as those settings apply to a newer version of the software. Now it's time to restart the simulation and let it run through to the end. Once the store contains 25 loaded pallets, we review the worker statistics. We also display the statistics table to view detailed data. With a double click, we open the graph view. On the second tab, Display Graph and Table, we select the Graph and Table option to display both visuals and numerical data more precisely. Alright, that brings us to the end of this video. In this lecture, we explored how to simulate workers, create a custom worker class, and use the worker pool object. We also covered how to display worker utilization using the worker chart or the standard chart object.